Well, my friends, it is time to continue our journey through the spruce of the A-4M Skyhawk from Magic Factory. In the first episode we went through the cockpit, painting and assembly, and even closed the fuselage halves together. For today, the plan is to get the airframe together. This video comes to you in cooperation with PCBWay, Magic Factory and MRP Paints. If one follows the instructions, the windshield and the canopy are to be installed very late in the build. I figured that the heads-up display and the pull handle of the ejection seat will not survive that long, and skipped several steps to prevent this issue. After the transparencies were removed from the spruce and cleaned up a little bit, I did some dry fit testing. That effort revealed that the windshield is quite reluctant to stay in place. It always wanted to pop off. Upon further investigation, I commenced sanding down the plastic from the cockpit in order to create more comfortable accommodation for the windshield. Was that a mistake of my own or there is a genuine issue? I don't know, but I'm pretty sure all the pieces I assembled so far were gap-free. Gluing the instrument panel shroud in place, I was well aware that there will be some more work to be done. Being in this general area, I installed the forward cockpit bulkhead while the glue on the shroud was curing. That was quite an easy and quick job. There are a couple of spots to attend to, but nothing major. Circling back to the instrument panel shroud, I did some more sanding to blend it in. Next, I applied some primer to check my handiwork, which was not that handy after all. Filling the gaps was more difficult than I anticipated. First round was using acrylic putty. All went well until I laid down the new paint. Well, the gaps were still there, only smaller. Next attempt I did was with Surfacer 500. After I used Q-tip and Mr. Hobby Aqua Thinner to rub off the excess. The final layer of paint tells a story of medium mediocrity, but I hope this will not be that visible. Before I could mount the windshield on, I needed to install the instruments that are located on both sides of the heads-up display. There were some sink marks to deal with, but nothing that cannot be fixed. After the paint, a quick dry brushing action highlighted the edges quite nicely. At last, this small detail was in place and I can confirm that it holds in position very nicely. The windshield installation went pretty well, but not entirely. The problem is that the instrument panel shroud is in contact with the windshield, but I realized that only after I saw the Mr. Cement SP creeping up the contact. The full extent of the damage will be available for admiration, well, when the build is over. I guess one of the benefits for you is to learn from my mishaps. To further protect the cockpit from harm and dirt, I masked off the canopy and temporarily fixed it in position using masking fluid. The pre-cut masks come with the kit and are in the form of two large pieces, one for each side, which was never going to work properly on such a convex surface. To fix that, I simply cut out the center portion, leaving the outer strips. The intakes are 4-piece assembly and the fit leaves some to be desired. The biggest issue in this area, if you want to achieve a perfect fit right from the assembly, is that you need to fit together several sub-assemblies. On each one of those, you may have a bit of tolerance. Something moves a fraction of a millimeter in the wrong direction here and there, no big deal, right? Well, when you combine all those small imperfections, the small misalignments add up and you get less than perfect assembly. So, how to overcome this issue? Well, the easiest thing will be to be precise right out of the bat, and maybe then it will all fall together. I don't know, because I had issues on both sides. Other approach is to intentionally push the slack in the joints in a direction where it won't hurt the following steps. Failing to do any of the above, I simply started to chip away pieces of plastic one bit at a time, testing the fit, removing more material where necessary, try again until the result is acceptable. After some more adjustments, I got where I got and decided to move on because it was taking way too much time. So I went to do some more sanding on the intake ramps. There was a mold split line inside and out. At least I could not find a picture that shows an actual raised panel in that area. After I went through the several grits of sandpaper, I applied a coat of Mr. Surfacer 1500 black primer. Before we go any further, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's video. PCBWay offers professional on-demand 3D printing service. They can print your projects in plastic, resin or even metal. They also offer sheet metal and carbon fiber fabrication, CNC machining in a huge array of materials, injection molding and many electronic component solutions. Check them out, link I will leave in the description. There will be, in my opinion, a significant portion of the fuselage that will be hidden behind the intake assembly. This would be hard to paint when the intake is glued into position, so I went ahead and painted the base color. In this case, MRP098, US Navy light gold gray, on the fuselage and also on the intake side that is facing the fuselage. The painting was quite straightforward. First I did a marbling layer with my new Gallery Mobius 0.2 and then I blended that with some nice even layers. And all was done with the base paint. Next I painted the internals of the intake trunk with MRP135 Insignia White. That I did rather plainly, but all I wanted was good and even coverage. Nothing fancy. Finally, I painted the intake ramps and the leading edge of the trunks with MRP299 Insignia Red. I will leave those alone until I am done with the painting of the model. My test fits suggest that this is a viable option, so I'm willing to give it a try. After all the work invested before the painting, now gluing the intakes in place was somewhat straightforward. I applied Mr. Cement Deluxe around the slots in the fuselage and its corresponding key on the intake side. Then I joined the parts together and adjusted the intake to get the best fit possible. When I was sure there is nothing more I can do about the gaps, I reinforced the joints with Mr. Cement SP. Before they can be assembled, the wings need quite a lot of prep work. There is a sizable amount of holes to be drilled out. The instruction booklet is quite punctual about the sizes. One awkward decision from the manufacturer is that the slots where the flaps and the aileron stabs should enter must be opened by the modeler. You choose flaps up or flaps down and the manual tells you which slots you need to cut open. I guess the openings would be visible once the control surfaces are attached. In that middle section I found quite a lot of mold lines which I have to remove. The middle section gets in the lower wing from the top. The forward portion lays flat against the wing in small grooves. All said and done, it was pretty easy installation. Next I mounted the ceiling parts. I found that in order to get flush fit I first had to start inserting the ceiling from the outer edge in relation to the fuselage. Mounting those flush is very important because there is almost no space between the top part of the wing and the gear base ceiling. The details inside the gear base are very nicely done. Commencing the wings assembly, first I had to fill the gap between the wheel wells. The piece that is supposed to go there fits nicely in regards to its dimensions. However, it does not follow the curvature of the wings assembly in the front corners. That meant that I had to apply pressure, but as it can be expected, some glue oozed out of the joints. I will deal with that at a later stage, but CA glue might have been a better option. Next, I glued down the fairings behind the main gear base. The fit was very good and I had zero issues. One of the fairings demanded an additional detail to be glued onto it. This detail had to go into a very shallow recess formed by a flange with some rivets on it. There were 2 other fairings near the tips of the wings. Before I could go ahead and glue the wings together, I had to put the light fixture inside its housing on the left wing leading edge. Using the new acrylic metallic markers from Gallery, I painted the backside in silver. On the front, I applied a black wash to outline the bumps. The housing I painted in black, and with that it was time to glue the formerly transparent part inside the lower wing. That needed some pressure so the part can't bottom out, which is important for the following step. And that would be to close the wing halves. The left side is slightly more involving because the pins and the light fixture are in a bit of a weird alignment. Other than that, the wing's assembly was very good. I applied some pressure along the joint using clamps just in case. Gluing the wings to the fuselage was not just a drop and glue type of deal, unfortunately. First I had to remove some material here and there, just to make sure that the wing's assembly is going to get inside its place. Also, the fuselage bottom has the same airfoil shape that the top of the wings, and they should mate without any gaps. I however experienced a high spot somewhere along the fuselage airfoil section, which caused a rocking motion when I installed the wing. If I were to have no gaps in the front, I would get a gap in the rear and vice versa. As you can see, my solution was to brute force the things together. To avoid glue oozing out of the joint, I clamped the 2 pieces together first and then applied Mr. Cement SP. Next, I mounted the fillets on each wing root leading edge. The instructions suggest that the gun barrel should be installed now, but I will steer clear out of this idea. Also, I decided to display the slots in the deployed position, so I cut out the suitable parts and massaged them with a file and the scalpel blade so that they can fit flush on top of the wing. In the deployed configuration, each slot comes in 2 parts. The smaller internal part has quite a few ejector pin marks on the contact surface. Despite being recessed, I gave them a few swipes with the sanding sponge to eliminate any potential issues. The assembly resulted in a gap. Whether or not this gap will be visible, I cannot tell at this point, but I can feel it and forget about it. Removing the excess filler, I was careful not to destroy the trailing edge of the slots. At the tail of the airplane, we get to install a few finishing pieces. One of them is an external shielding of the jet nozzle, and the other is a shroud of sorts, sitting above the shielding. First I glued the heat shield. I managed to glue the part so it is mostly level with the sides of the fuselage, but there was nothing that I could do about the step at the bottom. Well, nothing apart from breaking out a rather coarse file and beating the thing into submission. Before the final buff with 800 grit, I reinstated the panel line between the fuselage and the heat shield using Tamiya's fine scribing saw. After the final buff, I removed the dust with stiff brush, and what was left got melted away with some Mr. Cement S. Now the shield sits much more presentable. Join me on Patreon and get exclusive access to exclusive content. Be part of this very special club. Back on the slots. The parts that hold the slots in extended position come as separate pieces. And of course, each of them has some mold lines to clean up. Next up was inserting those into their respective places. Unfortunately, there is a lot of vertical play and no clear instructions how to fix each individual extender. I assumed a position of the slot that seems reasonable in comparison with my reference images. On a positive note, the slots snap on the extenders pretty nicely, and I was able to adjust the position with the slides on while the glue was setting. After that, I did some really simple and thus enjoyable. I mounted the photo etch aerodynamic fence on each wing. The groove is just wide enough for the photo etch part to fit snugly, and a small drop of CA glue should keep it in place forever. I started the work on the tail, removing some material that blocks the slot which should host some sensors. I have no idea why this is a thing in this kit, but I don't like it. Other than that, the assembly went fairly smoothly. Before the tail halves can get together, there is a rubber grommet that should be installed inside the tail. After I got the tail halves together, I detached the horizontal stabilizer fairings from the sprues. Those fairings will be the attachment points for the stabilizers and will be able to pivot in the grommet I installed earlier. One thing I realized too late was that I should have at least applied a layer of black primer inside the tail, so that when the horizontal stabilizers are pushed upwards, action won't be in bare plastic. We'll see how much I will be able to cover after the fact. The tail to fuselage assembly was excellent and I have nothing to report here. The horizontal stabilizers come separated into halves horizontally. The mounting pins are located on the top part. When top and bottom part get together, a notable gap appears on the leading edge. It would appear that those are warped and maybe not all kits suffer from the same issue. In any case, I applied the glue everywhere except for the leading edge. After the glue was done curing, I clamped the leading edge and applied the Mr. Cement SP very sparingly. The glue did its job and the gap was no more. After some sanding, the leading edges were nice and smooth as they should be. The upper tail section comes separated in two pieces vertically. Other than two small gaps on the front and the back of the top area, I had no issues. Those gaps I filled with CA glue and move on to the rudder. It also comes separated into halves but not mirrored. I did some adjustment before committing to the glue, but again fairly easy to deal with. I made an effort to flatten the mating surfaces of the top and bottom sections of the tail. This joint is made on a panel line, which makes it more difficult to repair should something go wrong. My effort apparently was not enough. On the left side the gap was okay and basically the same as the panel line below it. The right side, however, I had to fill with CA glue, and after some sanding and scrubbing the gap was near perfect. The rudder fits in the tail very nicely, and I will take advantage of this design and will paint it separately. Finally, for this area of the model, I installed a bunch of things on the tail end of the tail, so to speak. One of them was transparent, and that's all I have to say about them. The hump on the A-4M and other late variants is among the things that makes this aircraft attractive to me. The kit provides the hump as two main parts, splitting it lengthwise. It is a simple butt joint with two little pins to locate the pieces in the correct alignment. Barely. After the glue was done curing, I drilled two holes as per the manual and installed one small scoop on each side. Those tiny guys are hollow, which is commendable. After some mold line removal, I filled the seam with CA glue. Very soon after the application, I sanded down the seam line filler and the lost panel lines I rescribed and cleaned up. Next, I installed a vent panel on top of the hump. Again, rescribe the panel lines around it and move on to mount the hump. The installation of it on the fuselage was not as easy as I hoped it would be. In order to have the front end of the hump to sit somewhat flush with the contours of the fuselage, I had to bring it a bit backwards, towards the tail. For that, I removed probably about half a millimeter from the rear end. After I glued the hump on the fuselage, I call it a day. What I'm worried about is the transition between the hump and the tail. Did I do something wrong, or it was like that, staying proud in every direction? In any case, I will have to fix it in the next episode, along with the installation of a whole bunch of sub-assemblies. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, happy modeling, fellas!